As we were working to prepare for today's meeting, I think I wanted to just make sure that we were reminded of what our end goals were going to be, because I think a lot of the questions, and this is what happens when a committee is full of very super smart, super knowledgeable, with these varied backgrounds. When they all come together, the questions get very complicated. But I think for the first few meetings, I just wanted to emphasize again that after evaluating all of the district's properties, what the committee needs to do is make a determination as to the usage of that space. So basically asking if that space, whether it's a parcel of property or space, a portion of a space on a current school site, if it can be deemed as surplus to the school district's program. And then once the committee makes a determination as to those sites, the next step will be to provide a report to the board with the recommendations on potential uses for that surplus site or space. So by statute, a surplus space can be leased with an option to purchase, or a surplus sale. So, and all that again is a recommendation. So the board could say, we're not going to surplus any of this, or they could say, thank you for identifying these as surplus, we'll surplus them, but we don't want to lease it, we would rather sell it. So I just wanted all of us to keep in mind that I know that we are trying to, I think we were trying to get it a little bit into the weeds and get to the finish line before we were going through the process generally. So with that information, Kelly, if you could go to the next slide.
Sure.
So based on notes from the last meeting, these were the questions posed. And so in response, we'll be looking at the overview of the 3 big properties, as well as the estimates for the unused site penalties assessed by DGS, the Department of General Services, the cost to seek a waiver from the CDE, a waiver from the surplus property process, and then some other issues relating to the potential surplus, including deed restrictions and pre-qualifying. Next slide, Kelly. So our Marshall site, this is hard to tell. This is just an overview, but right now there are facilities on the site. Previously, the area above where you see the parking lot, that used to be part of the school district's property, but that was the portion that was sold off to the city. And I think we talked about the Naylor Act and selling open space to a city under the Naylor Act. So that portion is now owned by the city. So the only portion that we own, the 2.6 acres, is the parking lot area and those 3 large buildings on the site. It did close as an elementary school, and for those of you who are more in the know, I just pulled this from CDE records. So I think August 2002 was when we closed the doors, and then Stratford School took over under a private lease. The school district terminated that in 2018 to prepare it to open as a new elementary school for the school district. So that is the Marshall site. I think we were talking about various easements and zoning, and so I apologize. I thought I had all the information on the zoning, but it didn't pull up in my records, so I will have to work with staff on that.
Currently, it is just zoned for school and for open space use.
Makes sense.
And there was a on the parcel. I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry, guys. When we separated and exchanged the property to the city, we maintained the school zoning for our particular site, and then there's a zone for the open site, commercial. What do they call it? Commercial activity something space. So.
And Kelly and Karina, I think there was a question regarding the portables that are there. I believe all of those portables are leased, Kelly, if I'm not
Yes. So
mistaken.
the two, so you see five and then two, and then the two in the front are owned by the district. At the very front of the buildings, those large ones that are at the bottom
At
of
the
the
street.
third building.
Say what the street
And
is.
then let me use my cursor. So these belong to the district here. And this is where they have the kinder and pre-K spaces that they were utilizing. These two portables here have since been removed, and so they're no longer, we returned them and are no longer paying a lease on them. And these three are actually in a long-term lease, and these two, our lease will be up on those next year, and we can actually let those go without having significant financial hardship.
So, Karina, if we were to recommend sale of this 2.6 acres, it still would be surrounded by the 6 acres of city land, right?
Correct.
Any potential buyer would have to be aware of the relationship to the city property.
Correct. We're surrounded by all city lands.
Okay. Next slide or stay here?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Unless there's more questions, but yes. The next one is horse property. So this is the famous horse property, 35068 Fremont. 3 parcels, and it's kind of twisted weird, but the middle portion was acquired from Alameda County Transportation Authority, and then the other side of that piece, we received it, or we acquired it from Caltrans. So you can see there's a lot of shrubs and such up in the panhandle, as we like to call that area. That portion is, there are a lot of biological constraints in that area, meaning, before any sort of disruptive activity, ground disruptive activity can be performed, we do have to make sure that we're making sure there's no, baby birds, and some of the historical trees and such, aren't being disturbed. So that area is protected per se. And then you can see in the middle of that big square area, we do have a tenant out there right now who is doing a pretty good job of getting his goats and horses to graze the area to keep it clean. And we've been keeping that area clear mainly because we did receive DTSC approval in anticipation of site approval from CDE. DTSC is Department of Toxic Substances and Control. We do need approval from them to make sure the soil is clean before we seek CDE site approval. CDE is California Department of Education. So that is on hold. And in order to keep the soils clean, we just want to make sure that, the soils stay clean. And I think we've been keeping watch on that. So that is the horse property. I know that in the past, the district has looked at several options for usage of that entire site, but right now it just has that one tenant with the farm.
Right.
And then the Patterson Ranch. This is the 11 acres at the corner of Paseo Padre and Ardenwood. This was one of the layout options presented to the board several years ago. And you can see the aqueduct, as we call it, but that's an inactive Hetchy line that's going through the site. Or it's a water line going through the site. So that is the best, I think, option at the time that the board was able to agree on. And that site is still vacant. We're in negotiations with the regional park district and the city to potentially exchange portions of the site to provide the district with a better piece of land, but that's all been on hold. So what we are looking at right now is this 11-acre piece that's in front of you right now.
Karina, I'm just so I'm clear because I've not been to this particular. Was this a rendering of something that was going to be there at one time?
This was, so the district's architect, I think, you know, as with any land, right, the board asked for several renderings for options for layout, and this was the one that they came up with to address the water line going through the site.
Right. There's so many constraints on this site that it limits the number of options you have as far as how it could be laid out. So
is it zoned right now for housing? Or is it zoned commercial?
I think it's still zoned agricultural, isn't it, Karina?
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah, that whole area is basically swampland, I think. So
is this location, is it west of Paseo Padre? I'm trying to get my directionality.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so yeah, so that's all agricultural land.
So there's probably not anybody in the region that's going to want that land, then I take it.
The city will take it because they're, you know, they'll turn it into a park or some type of recreation space if they get it.
The idea, Marcus, was that the developers of the area across the street were to donate these parcels, one parcel to the city for park, one part to the regional park district. Originally, there were some other church lots involved, and then the area for the school.
Okay.
So it was a dedication of land that went along with getting the approval of the.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So I guess, Karina, the question then begs, are we in a position to do a swap with the city or the regional parks based on them having the 8 and the 10 acres and us having the parcel that's shown?
when you say we're in a position to, you mean
to swap out since the 40-foot aqueduct easement is running directly through our property, if we swapped with the regional park or the city park, would that be a better option for us in terms of development? And then they would then just have the park space and open space to develop on our 11 acres, and then we would then take one of the other ones to then develop.
Sorry, I'm trying to be careful here because, you know, there's been discussions, right, privileged discussions about this property. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm separating the two. But I think at this point, Kelly, however the committee recommends, you know, the eventual usage or however they want to dispose of it should be in the report.
Okay.
But we can talk about that separately if you'd like.
Okay. No, that's fine. Okay. I'm sorry. I was just thinking out loud.
Of course.
All right.
Okay. So we were talking about the penalties that will be assessed by it's not statute, it's the regulations. It's a 1.07% of the adjusted assessed value. And the adjusted assessed value is this calculation that the state allocation board comes up with. So I'm not even sure how they came up with the assessed value for these sites, but it looks like the horse property will be assessed over $600,000 next fiscal year. And the Patterson Ranch property will be assessed $742,000+ in 2021-22. And Kelly, I was hoping you could help me with this one. Marshall site was added last year. I know that we added in a property valuation at the time of $10.5 million, but I'm not sure how that was adjusted by the SAB and how they calculated the fees.
I have put in a request to get that information, so I do not have that available for us to discuss today.
Okay. I mean, this is so recent that we won't get, you know, penalized for a while, but the one the big one coming up is horse property. So I don't know. Relatively, it's not a large fee, but it's still a big chunk of change. So.
Okay.
All right.
And this is because it's an unused site.
Correct. So if we're not using it for our school purposes, or if we don't have, we're not under contract to sell it, then we will be assessed that site fee. So I think around June, Kelly, you'll be receiving another notice, or maybe you, Marcus, from the DGS, and that's when maybe we can assess how to identify those sites, and what the status may be, which could avoid a fee next year.
Okay.
But that's something we'll have to see, what the committee comes up with and what the board decides in the end.
Okay.
So we were talking about getting waivers from CDE, which is something that you, as the committee, can look into and possibly offer to the board. It's a statutory process. There is no fee to CDE for this process. It's more of staff time or legal time. And when we have prepared it, the CDE office, they require 10 to 12 weeks before a scheduled state allocation board meeting to receive the package and the request, and they review it, and then they will place it on the agenda of a state allocation board meeting 12 weeks out. So it can happen fast, but it's very intense and you have to gather a lot of information. So I think the specific question was, what does it cost? And the cost is just staff time and legal time. Then the final slide, Kelly. So the other issues, this is when we were researching, when I thought we should just kind of regroup and think about, our next steps versus what should be happening later on. The deed restrictions, again, should the committee recommend to the board to sell the site, then I think something such as a deed restriction is something you can offer in your report. But again, I think that's something that will probably come back to legal, and we can determine if that's something the board even wants to do, or and I know, I forget who mentioned this with the deed restrictions, but I think there's one thing to restrict someone's usage of a site that they purchase. So that's the kind of battle that we will be facing, when the school district puts out there that they will be restricting usage of a site that they're putting up for sale. So, getting that specific, I think there's no straight answer of can we do it or not. Potentially any restriction is possible, but I think will it be legal? I think when we get to that point, we'll be talking to the board about that. Will it be, is that something even the board wants to do? Again, I think that's something that we'll talk to the board about when we get there. So it's not something that you should not be looking at, and you can certainly put it in your report. But I think that's something that we should be looking into in further detail later on, when the board is ready to decide that it will be proceeding with the sale of a certain site. So that's a deed restriction. Pre-qualifying bidders. I mentioned this last time in kind of setting up your sales process. Should you decide to surplus sale a site, that you are able to, set up a process where you receive documents or some sort of pre-qualifying information for your bidders. Again, by statute, you cannot stop anyone from bidding on your property. But I think for some of the other school districts, a pre-qualification allows the staff to see who is interested. And if it looks like, for example, only charter schools are interested, they don't proceed with the sale, for example. Or if it looks like only developers are interested for a certain type of development, let's say senior housing, maybe the school district doesn't want that either, so they don't proceed with the sale. So it's that kind of process where you're not stopping a bidder from submitting a bid, but you're kind of looking at who your pool may be that will show up to the auction, and then determining from there if you want to proceed with the sale or just stop the process. So that I want to clarify as the pre-qualification of the bidders during the surplus sale. And I think we were talking about sale a lot, but I wanted to remind the committee that there are other options for usage of a surplus site. And one of them, we did talk about joint occupancy, which you do not have to go through the surplus, determining a property to be surplus and then going through the whole RFP process and such by statute. But another option is if the committee feels strongly in restricting usage of a site, and maybe something for the board to consider as well is just a long-term lease. So as we noted, I think the very first slide, under the surplus statutes, you can do a surplus sale, you can do a surplus lease with option to purchase, or you can also do a long-term lease, and that's a 99-year lease. And so in that situation, a 99-year lease for a surplus site allows the district to take in that lease income and put it into the general fund for the general fund. So that's by statute. And that can also be entering into a lease with whoever for whatever reason and for whatever purpose. So it allows a little bit more flexibility than going with the highest bidder in an auction sale, procedure. So I just want to mention that to you, that if you want to get the biggest bang, for your property and also have some control over who will be using it, the surplus statutes do offer the long-term lease option as something for you to consider in your report.
Karina,
yes.
The only thing I wanted to comment on what you just said is that if we were to, if the committee were to go in that direction, that would, in terms of the statute right now, that provides the flexibility of moving these dollars into the general fund, that would inhibit us greatly, because we would only, once the statute is up, which I think is in 2024, we would not, I don't believe we would be able to continue to utilize that lease revenue and move it to the general fund. But
so I did look at that. So by statute for a long-term lease, that is currently by statute permitted to go towards the general fund.
Okay.
I think the COVID amendment was specifically for the sale, the one-time sale of surplus sites.
Okay, so
you're right.
For the sale. Okay.
Yes, I was also concerned about that, but I had to dig a little, and it's already in the statute from before. So,
okay,
you're good to go there if that's what you're looking at.
But I'll put it this way: we would get a bigger bang if it were sold for some enormous amount of money, as an example, that we could put toward our general fund.
Immediately, sure, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course, yes.
How does the lease with the option for purchase compare?
So that also by statute, it has a streamlined process for bid offerings, but that does have they have the prohibitions, the same prohibitions as a sale, because in the end you're also seeking to sell it. So it's the same as a sale, lease with option to purchase.
So what's the typical time period? Is it 10 years, 99 years?
That one, it's up to 99 years as well.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, Kelly, that's all I had in my notes as the questions to respond to from last time.
You covered most of them pretty much. Are there any other specific questions that you guys have with regard to what we've just seen and presented?
I have a request.
Yes, Noel.
Is it possible to get a copy or PDF Karina's PowerPoint today and the one from last time also?
Yes, we will definitely provide that to you guys.
All right. It's just a good reminder of what's discussed. So when we are evaluating this thing, we can always look at it more like a note.
Yeah,
The
so,
second,
oh, I'm sorry. And Kelly, I was going to say, if we don't already have a website or dedicated web page or something for the 7-Eleven committee, that would be a good place to put the minutes and the presentation so the public can also have access to that if they like.
that's a
And
good
who,
idea.
yeah, and who's on the committee? Most districts do have this set up when they have a 7-Eleven committee.
That's nice.
Okay.
The second request is it possible to have some kind of documentation that tells us or gives us technical description of the property we're talking about? For example, property boundaries with bearings and distances and whatnot, and also some kind of indication on where the buried utilities that is of concern. For example, the high gas pressure in the Marshall property, where is it located in relation to the boundaries that we're talking about? And then, for example, in this horse ranch property, aside from potentially hazardous soil material, which we don't know, is there any concern for high pressure buried utilities, water or gas, or high voltage overhead lines, things like that? And so it's the same in the Patterson property. It'll be good if we have some technical description of that property also, and where is this abandoned HHC pipeline in relation to, does it traverse the entire property? Is it worthwhile to invest on removing it so before selling it? Things like that. You know? So it would be good if we can get all those particular background information for the properties that we're talking about.
Can I just make an observation? And I think information is good, and I do like some of the things you suggested, but sometimes you kind of put a request for information before some other things. And I've been sitting here thinking, we're talking about, obviously the general fund is a problem. We need money for the general fund for the school district to operate.
Yes.
I'm not sure that we have any funds for construction of schools, any new construction over the next 15 years. And that would then say, well, then this is other information about the properties is not necessary. What is really the basic thing? Do we have any plans within the school district to construct any new schools in the next decade? Do we have the funds for it? If we don't, well, then the questions about the property themselves become moot, I think, because then we wouldn't be even looking at putting buildings on them because it's got to be somebody else's problem. Am I making myself clear?
I totally understand.
I understand, I think. And perhaps I made a wrong reasoning for why I would be interested in understanding the relative locations or alignment of any concerned utilities buried or overhead in relation to the boundaries of the property. It's not necessarily to mean to say for the city to invest additional money to increase the potential proceed of sale. It is just, to me, interesting and vital in for us determining how we can help the city to get the best bang for their best bang for selling this property or selling surplusing this property.
Well, I guess I go back to my question to both Marcus and to Kelly. And are there plans within the next decade to add any additional school facilities other than maybe expansion of current facilities in Fremont? There must have been some discussion. Maybe there wasn't discussion, but that sets at least a 10-year line we have to look at.
So Kathleen, I think one of the things that it's not a hard question to answer, but it's a loaded question in that we're in a period of time right now in the district where we are in the process of updating our long-range master plan. So I can refer you back to the original long-range master plan that was developed in 2016, and that will outline for you what the goals and objectives of the district were at that time. But now that we're in the process of updating, looking at the declining enrollment and looking at the modification of the needs of the district, I can't answer to say yes or no that, yeah, we're going to have a need in 10 years, but we will be able to answer that as we go through this process of updating and revamping that master plan. I think the first thing would be to go ahead and look at the old one and see what the 10-year look ahead was. And now that we're in that 10-year period, see where we fall. And then as we're going through the next process and push forward another 10, see where that also shakes out and lets us determine, hey, is this really valuable or not? And so, but it is a very relevant question that you're asking and a point that's made.
But
And
Kathleen,
go ahead.
no, I was going to say I probably would answer that a little differently than Kelly did, because if we generally your enrollment is generally what drives new construction of school facilities generally, unless you are tearing down an old building that's really is beyond its useful life, 50, 60, 70 years old, and it makes more sense to tear it down and build a new school. But I think based on what we see right now over the next 10 years with our enrollment, it doesn't appear likely that we will need a new school. We currently do have some there was some land that was donated to the district by the city that we are considering to alleviate some pressures in the Parkmont area. But outside of that, based on purely enrollment, there to answer your question, does not appear to be a plan for any new school facilities. So that's
I guess I just want to ask, when I'm looking at these properties, Patterson or the Horse property seems to be, from an observation standpoint, one that we're probably not going to need. Just from what I had heard, in the sense that was originally the talk of Thornton, but we talked about it last time, how Thornton has already started the middle school conversion. So there would be no middle school on that. But Patterson Ranch, as I understand it, you've got 2 elementary schools that it's feeding, that are proximity, that are almost 1,000 student schools. They're busting at the edges, and so that to me seems like that has always been the talk of a need for another elementary school on that north end of Fremont. And so I'm wondering, is that one of those, as you guys are talking about a new 10-year plan, is that one of those things that we're still considering as a need, or is it the district is saying that's not a need anymore, even though we've got 2 very large elementary schools that can't handle the students that they have right now?
And what you're describing, Jeff, to me, I at this point I have not heard of significant impacts in the area that you are talking about that would warrant a future school. And I know Kelly participated as part of the FAC, and I don't know if that's come up in discussion or if that came up in the previous master plan. All right, Kelly, do you have any additional?
Patterson is on the radar, but we have not had any in-depth discussions regarding whether there needs to be another school or not. FAC is looking at many things, and one of the topics that we're going to cover at our next meeting is entertaining boundary issues, and looking at how, if boundaries were shifted, how that would impact elementary schools and, enrollments and identification of sites nearby. But we haven't really kind of delved into that because that hasn't been the focus over the last few months. But we definitely will consider it and put it on the agenda for a topic of discussion.
Appreciate that. So if I'm looking at the three properties, then do we have a priority list of what we should be focusing our time right now? Is it Marshall first and then moving on up that list?
It's my understanding Marshall is our priority, and then we move up the list after that. Marcus, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that sounds right to me. I was going to defer to Karina. I don't know if there's a priority order or we just go through them one at a time. And
So by statute, I mean, they do like the committee to look at or evaluate the properties district-wide at the same time, but are you asking if you can evaluate Marshall first, recommend something to the board in report form, and then move on to the next property? Or
well, it's my understanding based on the last board meeting where action was taken with the 7-Eleven committee that they specifically tasked us to deal with Marshall first. But if that's not something that kind of is held to if we're not honoring that based on what the legislation requires us to do, then that's something that we have to be aware of too.
Well, if I could throw this out, I think it would be helpful for me if we were focusing on one property at a time in our discussion, and then we can bring it all together to have a plan of what we're recommending for all three. But bouncing around from property to property to property in the discussion sometimes convolutes it and makes it a little bit more difficult to keep the focus. So I'm just wondering if we're supposed to be talking about the Marshall site as like our highest priority, maybe that should be the focus of our conversation. And then we can add the other sites as we narrow down what we think we want to do with that site. Does that make sense?
It does.
It does.
And as far as process, I
Yeah.
think what Kelly outlined makes a lot of sense as far as going back to our previous master plan and seeing what's changed from then and what potentially we're facing with the spending enrollment. So I think that process makes some sense. But I also think that going back to Noel's comment, getting as much information on each of the sites gathered in one place will help us.
Well, what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and reach out to our webmaster and find out what we have available right now for us to go ahead and compile this information for you all. And in the meantime, we'll go ahead and put a folder together, and we can send out a link to you all that you guys should be able to access the information. Because I don't want to like send you guys a gazillion different emails with a bunch of attachments, but try and do it in an organized way where there's a folder and then everything is kind of compartmentalized and organized for you all to then review. So we can go ahead and do that. And as to your point, Marcus, I'll make sure that we have a link or something on the district's website that can take folks to the 7-Eleven committee, and they can kind of see the process that we're going through, as well as the meeting minutes and any presentations that we share, so that they can have an opportunity to review them as well.
Yeah, and Kelly, Hayward really has a good webpage for 7-Eleven, so you could probably look at theirs as an example.
Okay. I will definitely reference that.
Okay, I just have a follow-up question. A very good point about prioritizing which we need to evaluate first. And I totally agree. Now, this is just out of curiosity. The abandoned water line on the ranch property, that belongs to SFPUC. Does SFPUC already rescinded their property right on the access right away? I mean, the ownership of this ranch property is totally belonging to the FSUSD or the Fremont Education Board. Similarly, on the Marshall property, that's why I wanted to see the relationship of the alignment of the utilities relative to the technical boundaries of this lot. If any portion of this underground utility traverses inside the property, that's a right of way. Uh, who owns that right of way, basically?
Karina, I defer to you.
Well, so I'll just say two things. I think, again, the first goal, right, for this committee is to determine which spaces and which sites are to be surplus. So I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds here, but with respect to the pipeline issues, as I noted last time, I'm going to have to speak with staff separately about what information they want to share in this open forum, because a lot of that is privileged information.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
So, okay.
Yes, Liz. You're muted.
Here we go. So I'm a little late, my apologies. Did we determine if any state funds were used for the Marshall site?
We are in the process of determining that. Marcus, did you want to speak to that at all?
No, I was going to say the same thing you just said. We have one of our consultants taking a look at that right now.
So still determining it.
Yeah, we had a conversation with her earlier today, and because we have owned the site for so long, the records surrounding it are a little bit more difficult to access, and so it's going to require us a little bit more time to do a little more homework and a little digger deeping than what we were able to do just kind of on the surface initially. So, but she is promising to get back to us promptly with an answer for that. All right. Do you guys have any additional questions for Karina regarding the presentation? Okay, I'm going to take it as a no. So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Will the presentation be available for us to view after this meeting?
Yes, I'm actually going to go ahead and send it out to you all individually, but we're also going to go ahead and post it to our website when we put the connection for the 7-Eleven committee on the Fremont website. Okay. And I did record this because you were late, so I wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to see the whole meeting, and you can watch it at your leisure later so that you have everything that we've talked about.
Thank you.
The other thing that I was going to say is I wanted to recap because we're coming up on just about 10 minutes left in the meeting, and I want to be mindful of people's time. So the things that I've got for us that we're going to focus on for our next meeting is really determine, one, we're going to prioritize which 3 properties we want to look at. And so I hope we can do that by the end of this meeting. And decide which one we want to take in order. The other is to continue to look at options for the joint occupancy, and also to get more historical documentation for you all. And I'm going to coordinate with Karina to see what is privileged and what is not. And anything that's not privileged, we will go ahead and put in a folder for you all to then be able to review. And then I will continue to look at what options are available in terms of criteria for us to pre-qualify the bidders for any of the properties that we want to dispose of. And then what that will entail is what exactly are we going to look for? Is it, ability to pay? Is it, are we going to exclude, other schools? Are we going to exclude daycares? Are we going to, just sort of putting together a framework of what we don't want versus what we do want. And then we will continue to get some more options on deed restrictions and what that actually looks like for any of the properties that we've talked about today. So have I missed the mark on anything, or have I summarized everything pretty well today?
I'm curious, do we have the ability to get an assessment on the Marshall property? Or,
is it like, are you talking about an appraisal or
a comparative type real estate.
Marcus, I don't know. When was the last time that we did that? Is that
but once again, I'm going to defer to Karina in terms of the appropriateness of that as part of this process, or if that's something we do after this process, or
So you can get an appraisal done. To be honest, I think I noted that we submitted or certified to the DGS that right now the appraised, or what we think is the value, is 10.5 million, but the state allocation board will adjust that accordingly. So once the committee determines that the Marshall site is surplus to the district's program, and then your recommendation is to either lease or sell it, I think that will be a good time for potentially going out for an appraisal to make sure that we can, adjust our parameters for that process.
Thank you, Karina. All right. So are there some topics that you guys would like to discuss for our next meeting that I haven't already covered?
What is is there a firm date for the first report from this committee to the board? Because time is moving and we're not getting anywhere.
Well, I think we've actually done a pretty good job so far with what we've done. So pat yourself on the back. Even though you don't think you're moving really fast. I had indicated to the board in my board update that we would have a draft summary to them sometime in January. So we have, the option to put together a draft and a preliminary kind of perspective, and then continue to work on it and fine tune it, and get it to them, shortly thereafter.
My notes show we have 2 meetings left before the end of the year.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
We can work wonders. We're superheroes.
Well,
I hate being late, let me just tell you.
Well, if I could take the temperature of the committee, we could establish that Marshall is a priority and that we are going to focus on it first and make that
yes
motion.
Motion to make Marshall priority.
Second.
Thumbs up. Show of hands. Looks like it is unanimous. Okay. So of the other 2 remaining properties, my suggestion is that we look at, as the second option, the property that has the largest financial impact on penalties next. And that
would be the horse property, right?
The horse property would be second, or the Patterson Ranch.
No, it's the horse property, I think.
Right. And I think the deadline on the horse property is actually has a upcoming more quickly than the one that we have Marshall.
I'm gonna pull this here we go. So the horse property, we have assessed penalty 2122 of 603 321, and then Patterson Ranch has assessed penalties of 742 795 and 2021 22.
My leaning of the second priority would actually probably be the horse property, because I think we can do more with that property. It has more potential to be sold, even if we determine to do that. I don't think the Patterson Ranch property is going to generate income for the district, if that makes sense.
There's a big disparity in the acreage.
Yes.
Horse property is big. It could even be sectioned.
Right.
Agreed.
So,
is there a motion to that effect then, maybe? Horse property?
Do you all want to take a vote on making the horse property number 2 priority?
That was my motion.
Second.
Sharon and, I see Teresa's hand. Sharon, how about you? You're on mute. Oh, okay. You're good. So that one is unanimous. And so by default, the third property that we would look at would be the Patterson Ranch, in the order of Marshall's first, Porsche property is second, Patterson Ranch is third.
Yep.
All right.
So Kelly, so with the idea, Karina, it would be like three separate board activities over a time period, as opposed to okay.
That may make sense. And Kelly, since you were mentioning the timeline and Ms. Newman doesn't want to be late, which I appreciate, I think I just wanted to also remind you all that it's best practice to have community meetings. So if we're going to focus on Marshall, Kelly, we may have to start organizing how do we do that in COVID? But, organizing some Zoom meetings with the folks who live in that area and have this kind of discussion on what they see as a best use, or if they even see that as an area that we should hold on to for school purposes. Because if you recall, the whole intent of the legislature is to have the community decide on how to use and dispose of public property. So you have to start thinking about that for the Marshall site.
Okay.
That's the Kennedy attendance area, correct?
Correct. It is. It's close to Millard, so it's in technically I think it's a Blake Howe neighborhood, but it's Millard, Ricks, right around the corner from. It's like Farwell, and Stevenson would be the main crossroads.
Right.
Okay. Well, I will work on that and maybe have something for you guys for our next meeting in terms of like a message or a community sort of poll to send out, to get people to respond. And then from there, we can set up a meeting and maybe have a virtual roundtable or town hall or something. That'll probably push us into December for that to happen. But that's a good start, though. Okay.
Hey, Kelly, if there's any information, let's focus in on Marshall, that you could share with us, the legal counsel says we can read ahead of time, that we can get maybe next week to give us some time to read it through and come to this meeting with a little bit more knowledge and homework done on our part.
Sure.
I think it would make our time together more productive.
Okay, I can definitely do that. Now that we can definitely now drill down and really focus on the task at hand.
Well, there are some parts of statute that I think we probably need to have for focus. I mean, I myself have looked at it, but one doesn't necessarily need to look at every section. Certain sections apply.
Right, and then we can.
Your question, Liz, or statement?
I'm sorry.
I don't think I understood your statement. Or
when you were talking, when Jeff was saying information that we could review before our next meeting, I think it's having those sections in statute that refer to the surplusing of property, and I think if by next meeting we have some information about how the property was purchased. I think we need to look at those sections of statute so that we know what happens if, in case, we did use state funds for this property, for the Marshall property, because that does affect how much money we are able to get out of it. But if, of course, it was purchased by other means, capital funds or something to that effect, then it will be a moot point. But just so that we're prepared.
Okay.
And then I would say, along with that, if we can come up with some method to kind of message board or something where we can draft questions as we have them. That way we can submit them ahead of time, which will help with your guys' presentation.
Okay. Does everybody have Gmail or some type of access to a Google document? Is we can create a Google document and then I can share it with you all. It's just the way that FUSD has it set up. It's very difficult for us to share outside of the Gmail/Google network. So if everybody's on Gmail or Google in some way, then this becomes really easy. If not, I'll look at other ways to set up access to get to that information.
I'll send you my Gmail account because I have both Gmail and Hotmail, and you're using Hotmail right now. So I'll send you my Gmail.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
That makes it
I'm
easier
already
for
on
you to share.
Gmail.
Say that once again, Noli.
I'm already on Gmail.
Okay,
You have my email.
thank you.
Kelly, if you need help with the settings so that anybody can access and edit, let me know and I can show you how to do that.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. Yeah, as much as I love technology, I'm not always the most adept at it because I don't have time to spend on it and play with it. So I end up always asking everybody for help. So, okay, great. Well, thank you all. Is there anything else before we close out our meeting that you all wanted to discuss or had questions about? No? Okay, well, thank you guys once again for donating your time and spending time with us to review this. This is really very, very important work for our district, and it's just so important that we have your participation. And so I just wanted to extend my thanks again for you all to do this, and that we've got a lot of good stuff that we're going to get done pretty soon. So have a wonderful week. And yes, ma'am. Yes, Ms. Holmes.
Question, Kelly. Since we've made the decision to take these one at a time, and we want to concentrate on each one, do we need to look at the schedule of meetings to see if we needed an additional time to get into
You know what? My suggestion would be for us to go ahead and pull together the information that we can and make that decision at our next meeting of what we want to establish as a schedule for December, January, possibly February, so that we can, now that we've prioritized what we want to look at, let's then look at what information we're able to gather, and then decide, hey, this is a lot and we need more time, or hey, this is exactly what we need, and let's go ahead and proceed forward with the schedule we've already established. But I think that it would be worth our while to kind of look at everybody's schedule moving forward and then have that discussion in our next meeting.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Awesome. Marcus, did you have any closing remarks?
No, just I think you said it well. Just thank you everybody for your time.
Wonderful. You guys have an awesome weekend and stay healthy and safe. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.